Hi, Stephanie. How are you doing?
Well, how are you?
Good, good. I'm audible, right?
Yeah, you're coming
Okay,
through loud.
great.
Hi, my name is Alice from Infona. Welcome to NGOWP, the first online platform that connects environment researchers and journalists.
My name is Gerald Tenywa. I'm a senior multimedia journalist working with a New Vision newspaper, and I've been working there reporting on the environment for the past 20 years.
My name is Mary Akurut. I have a doctorate in engineering science, focusing on water resources and climate change. My research interests are in water quality, climate change around Lake Victoria, and I'm currently working with the Uganda Electricity Generation Company as the manager dam safety and water resources.
The scientists believe that their role is to work in the lab, do their research somewhere in a research office, and they have no business with the media. And yet, the media can add value to their work by reporting it and making sure that it reaches so many people. And this has been quite a challenge. The Nile well is bringing these two parties together to be able to interact, to be able to chase the mistrust that has been existing between the two parties.
Nile well is a unique platform. It helps to interlink the journalists, the scientists, students and other researchers. It gives you a platform to also link to your own work, and also it gives you updates on the current and existing information that you have on the Nile Basin.
You see, in many cases, the journalists, the first time, they may not get it right. But through continuous interaction with the scientists, they'll be able to learn a lot more, and they'll be able to learn correctly. I'm a living example of that. The way I was reporting 20 years ago is not the way I was reporting 10 years ago, and it is different from the way I was reporting 5 years ago.
It's important that we join this Nile well platform because it helps us to link between scientists and journalists and provides information to the public in a way that is really understood and information that is scientifically proven. So this is a good link that you need to join. So go Nile well.
So what are you waiting for? Create an account today by logging on to www.nile.org.
A very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us for the 12th session of the Nile Well Science Wednesday. We are very pleased to have our colleagues from the National Geographic. So we appreciate you making time to join us. In case you're joining us for the very first time, my name is Deli Sive. I'm the communications officer at InfoNile. So you might be asking yourself, what is InfoNile? InfoNile is a geojournalism group that covers critical stories on water and the environment in the Nile Basin, and we use data and science-based multimedia storytelling. So for this Nile Well Science Wednesdays, we launched them sometime last year around April, and we use this Science Wednesday to facilitate learning between scientists and journalists based on the different science communication topics that are shared. So we hope you continue to learn something new and you're able to develop story ideas out of this session. So feel free to introduce yourself in the chat box, write in your name, your country, your organization, and your profession. Some of the hashtags you could use today, there is Science Wednesdays, you could use NILEWELL. There's also Inside Nat Geo and Into the Okavango. I'm going to type in the chat box the specific hashtags you could use. Feel free to type on whatever, promote the session on social media using either of the chat boxes, either of the hashtags typed in the chat box. For this session, I would encourage us to mute our microphones unless you're contributing. You can type your questions in the chat box even as the session is ongoing. In case you need to interrupt midway, feel free to use the raise hand emoji. For today, we are very glad to have Kerllen Costa and Mauro Lourenco from the National Geographic Okavango Wilderness Project. And the topic for today is Africa's natural water towers beyond snow and ice. So maybe just a brief bio. We have Mauro Lourenco, is a geospatial ecologist and a data analyst for the National Geographic of Okavango Wilderness Project. He works on research topics based on freshwater ecosystems, wetlands, forests, fire, carbon, and environmental monitoring. He uses remotely sensed datasets and geographical information systems towards high-impact scientific outputs and research. He has worked throughout Southern Africa, including Lesotho, Angola, South Africa, and Botswana. With him is Kerllen Costa, who is a biologist and environmental anthropologist. And for the past 15 years, Kerllen has dedicated his career to uncovering and understanding Angola's natural cultural heritage. He also joined the National Geographic Okavango Wilderness Project in 2016. He started off as a volunteer for its first scientific expeditions, and he's now serving as its country director for Angola. In his role as the county director, he leads major river expeditions for the most remote rivers and landscapes in Africa. Since 2010, Kerllen has also spearheaded the Great Angolan Escarpment Project, which has resulted in the creation of 2 conservation areas in that country. Last but not least, Kerllen earned degrees in natural resources engineering in Angola and environmental sciences in South Africa. So from these bios, ladies and gentlemen, we can all know that these are experts, very learned people in this field, and specifically the National Geographic Okavango Wilderness Project. So much of what they're going to talk about is Africa's water towers and specifically the Okavango catchment area. So good afternoon, or rather good evening, Kerllen and Mauro. How are you?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me today. I think unfortunately Kerllen is absent this afternoon. He's
I'm
currently
sorry.
in Tempwe. It's a very remote area of Angola. Yeah, so
Okay.
he was planning on joining us, but he simply can't. He doesn't have the bandwidth to join us today. But Stephanie Myceli and myself will go through the presentation, and we've tailored it just for the section that I'm more comfortable in talking through. So very happy to be here this afternoon, and I think Steph can start us off. Thanks for having us.
Okay, thank you so much, Mauro. Good evening, Steph. How are you?
Well, how are you today?
Fine, thank you. Nice to see you. Ever smiling.
Nice to see you again. Can everyone see this okay?
Okay. Yeah, we can see it.
Excellent. Well, Mauro introduced himself and Kerllen sends apologies. That just means we're going to have him back again to talk about really the important community engagement work he's leading and how the cutting edge science Mauro is leading and his traditional knowledge and community engagement work really goes hand in hand. Before Mauro takes it away, you're going to hear a few names today. So I just wanted to put it all together for you. So we're with the National Geographic Society. Many of you may have heard about the magazine. You may have heard about National Geographic's linear TV channel, the documentaries, our social media channels. You might have favorite photographers you follow. But the National Geographic Society is our nonprofit arm, and we have a pretty ambitious mission to illuminate and protect the wonder of our world. And that really comes to life through who we call National Geographic Explorers. And they're essentially grantees working in conservation, science, education, and storytelling, and really carrying out that mission to illuminate and protect the wonder of the world. And the National Geographic Okavango Wilderness Project is a wonderful example of how that's happening. So NGOWP, as we call it for short, is one of the programs that society supports, and it's working to protect the Okavango Basin. This spans 3 countries. It's so big you could see it from space, and it's home to what we call a water tower that's really crucial for the continent's water and food security. So and then before I turn it to Mauro, we have, we're the nonprofit side of Nat Geo, but we have the fantastic megaphone of the magazine and the different media properties. So when you consume our media, you're often hearing about National Geographic explorers or programs like the Okavango Wilderness Project. That's often who you might be hearing about in the documentaries and magazine. This is an excerpt from 2017 about, the many miles this team has trekked studying the Okavango Basin, showing its importance to the world. And recently we had a documentary come out called Nkashi Race for the Okavango, which delves more into the people who really make this landscape special. So with that, it's all you, Mauro.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Steph. I really appreciate that introduction. And also really appreciate to see all the names that are in the audience today, some ex-colleagues, some current colleagues, supervisors. So I really appreciate your support and people from all over the world, which is really, really exciting. So thanks so much for joining us today. I'm going to speak a little bit about who we are. So we're a family of organizations that's really sitting underneath the Okavango Wilderness Project. As you can see on the top right there, we have Wildbird Trust, which is essentially South African, and we have Wildbird Trust Botswana. We have Fundação de Cima, which is essentially the Angolan branch, and also working towards Namibian Wildbird Trust. But as this photo shows, and this is actually in Tempwe, this was taken last year, there is, there's, as these rivers are transboundary, so are our staff. So really, a collaborative effort, a lot of good harmony between staff and researchers and logistics and whoever else is contributing towards this common goal and this family of organizations that's working towards protecting the headwaters of the Okavango Basin, all the way down to beyond the Okavango Delta in the Mahari Pans. So just in this photograph on the left-hand side is Kerllen Costa. He's actually in Tempwe right now, so he is there. And some of the structures that are still there in Tempwe are from during the Angolan Civil War, 1975 to 2022. And really that just speaks to how challenging it is to get up into these headwater regions. You can see there's a team which has got a diverse range of nationalities here. And this is just a small portion of the family of organizations and the people that are actually working on the ground from what this photograph is taken. So just a little snippet of the amount of people that are working towards this. Okay, so what we do, really the first sort of bullet point there is around the science. And working towards protecting these headwater regions for the Okavango Basin. And really, it's about conducting research. Most of our research is really about river baselines and going down rivers and collecting data, observation data. And then trying to connect that observation data with local indigenous knowledge. And that's really where the storytelling comes into play. So that's the real asset of having a partner like National Geographic, because they really excel in the storytelling aspect when it comes to education and for example, all the documentaries that have been produced along this river basin in Nkashi that Stephanie mentioned earlier, into the Okavango, which was the mega transect that took place in 2016 from source to sand, right from the Krita source lake all the way down to the end of the Mahari Pans. And then really just extending that towards sustainable livelihoods and community-led work, where a lot of the work is tailored towards what communities are already doing in protecting the landscape, and also providing tools and expertise for them so that they can turn their conservation efforts into something meaningful for them, for their local economies. So going back to the theme of this presentation, Africa's water towers beyond snow and ice. Why study water towers is the question here. Really what we're talking about here is a high altitude area that's a very important source water region and sustains flows downstream throughout the year. The map that you see behind the question why I study water towers was produced for the Esri user conference. So as I was introduced, my background is in geospatial science and GIS and remote sensing. So Esri, so Esri is the technology company, almost like the Google of mapping. And so we produced this map along with cartographers at National Geographic. Some of those team members are here watching today, so I really appreciate their attendance. This Angolan Highlands Water Tower map. And you can see that in that sort of behind that green title is this gray boundary for the Angolan Highlands Water Tower. And you can see that this water tower doesn't just support these two very important basins or these two very important rivers, the Quito and the Kubangu, that flow into the Okavango Delta, but many others. To the northeast, we have the Kasai River Basin, which is part of the Congo River Basin, which is the largest river basin in Africa. We have the Upper Zambezi, the Kwando, which are both supporting the Zambezi Basin, which flows into the other ocean that you can't see here, the Indian Ocean, out in Mozambique. You have several other basins that flow into Namibia, the Kunene and the Kuvalai. Here it's labeled Etosha Basin. And then some rivers that are more closer to home for Angolans would be the Kwanza River Basin, which really feeds the Kwanza River, which is the major river of Angola because of the amount of people that rely on it in Luanda, which majority of the population of Angolans live. So it's not just about the importance of the Okavango Delta and the National Geographic Okavango Wilderness Project, but all the other basins that this water tower contributes towards. And we can easily talk about the biodiversity in the Okavango Delta. We can wax lyrical about all the biodiversity and important biodiversity that's downstream of this important source water area. But in fact, the Angolan Highlands Water Tower is a center of endemism on its own. So the team has worked towards, many naturalists have worked towards this, biologists have worked towards this center of endemism, and incredibly, there's a wealth of biodiversity there. So since 2015, the various naturalists and biologists that have been up into the water tower have discovered 143 new species, which are currently being described and new to science. An important area for endemism in Angola, meaning that those animals are only found there. Across all taxes, so including some fishes, bats, mice, flowers, lizards, snakes, even fungi. So very interesting biodiversity, including Africa's smallest dragonfly, the Lilliput prickleg, a new tarantula species that's the size of a human hand, and it's actually got a horn on its back. And someone that I will talk about quite fondly is Dr. Steve Boyes. Actually had a small fish named after him called the Microtenopoma Steve Boise. And I think that that's just a homage to how much work that Steve has done in the basin and bringing these organizations together. So very, very important area for endemism, not just where in terms of the Okavango Delta, but at this headwater area too. So talking about our recent paper, I published this paper with my supervisor for my PhD, Professor Stefan Woodbourne. So in the title, we define the Angolan Highlands Water Tower. Luckily for us, there's been a lot written about the Okavango Delta. So in this instance, we had the opportunity to look upstream at where this water comes from. Really, scientists are interested in the Okavango Delta because of the level of biodiversity and this annual flood that comes through the delta itself. And it's really a delta. It's a major alluvial fan, essentially in a desert. And without this headwater area, it would simply dry up. And we looked at a 40-plus year precipitation budget for the headwater catchments of the Okavango Delta. Within this slide, you can actually use the QR code to gain access to the paper. It's been accessed thousands of times and has had several mentions in conservation media. So very important output that was published in June 2023 in Environmental Monitoring and Assessment. And it was published just before the ESRI conference, so we could present a lot more comfortably and confidently during ESRI. So within the local context, the source of life, or the Lisima ya Mono, it's meaning the source of life in the local Luchazi language. And as I mentioned earlier, we're talking about very important areas of biodiversity in terms of the Okavango Basin, which this source water or headwater or water tower region contributes towards. 2/3 of Africa's remaining elephants, that's essentially in the Kasa Basin and in the Kasa region. Keystone populations for giraffe, leopard, cheetah, and more. And then also speaking towards people, food security, water security. And this is really just in the context of the Okavango Basin, and these numbers will go way higher, and the influence is way higher when you put into context the Congo Basin, the Zambezi, and so on, and all the different countries that this water tower contributes towards in terms of fresh water. So we're going to just unpack a little bit more about this term, a water tower, or what is a natural water tower. And it sometimes depends on who you ask. If you ask maybe a geologist, they would talk about a source water region, and they'll talk a lot about aquifers in this case. And really the term water tower has been used by within academic literature. It's quite a relatively new concept that people are getting used to, but it's been very nicely described by Imbecile et al. And Imbecile et al., I'm referring to a paper that was written in 2020, and that study was also in contribution with National Geographic, so in connection with National Geographic, where they produced the Water Tower Index for the world. So as far as Imbecile et al. Are concerned, it's used to describe an area with large quantities of water, which are stored in mountain ranges. So just as you would imagine a reservoir storing water in a high up place, that water can flow downstream and feeding people and nature and livelihoods. So what's very important about a water tower in this context is that compared to its downstream area, the water tower region receives a greater amount of precipitation and has higher runoff, and delays its release to the downstream areas because of certain mechanisms, either be it snow or glaciers or lake reserves. So there is some sort of storage that's allowing this water to flow down, and we have this supply and demand being met quite well. So Imbecile et al. Talk about a buffering capacity. So there's this buffering that comes into play when you're talking about rivers. You might have a dry season or extreme heat season or hot season, and maybe that river will not flow during that period. But what water towers do, because of their buffering capacity, because of the mechanisms they have, let's say, for example, snow and ice or glaciers, during that period, those mechanisms will sustain flow throughout the year. So really, the buffering capacity and the seasonality of flow it's constantly being met. As the demand increases, the supply is there. It's a very important concept for these natural water towers. And we're going to just continue a little bit with this paper from Imbecile et al. It's very important in the context of this whole concept of beyond snow and ice. So within their definition, they considered cryospheric water tower units. And what they did was they imposed thresholds. So they used snow-derived data and they used glacier inventories because of that buffering role of water towers. And it was used as a defining features of water towers. So, and they go on to say that consequently, there's areas in Africa, for example, that don't have much permanent snow and ice reserves. and they don't meet the criteria of the water tower unit. So they're left off of the global map. So it says in this title of this slide. And what you see in the very first figure that they present is the water towers index of the world, including the world's water towers. Unfortunately for Africa and for Australia, the two driest continents, they do not have any water towers simply because they use the snow cover and this glacier inventory within their defining criteria. So for me, it's not to say that I'm very critical of this paper. You can see this paper was published in Nature. It has over 800 citations, 44,000 accesses. So a lot of good work has gone into that paper. But it, as an African scientist, provides a very enticing opportunity to go and understand what's happening in Africa and how can we start to define our own water towers. So moving on, there has been some literature, and in this case, a report written about Africa's water towers. And this is coming out of the United Nations Environmental Programme, or UNEP, in 2010 Africa Water Atlas. And in this water atlas, a very important map was displayed, which is there on the right-hand side, which includes Africa's water towers. And what I've done just to help with the naming of the water towers is I've simply just ranked them in terms of size. So I digitized the map, which I find it's a very important map, and I ranked them in terms of size. So as you would see, we have the Ethiopian Highlands, Angolan Plateau, and Lesotho Highlands as the biggest. The Ethiopian Highlands contributes to the Nile Basin, and for our audience here, a lot of them are coming and representing and talking about the Nile a lot in their work and through their media outlets. So 11 different countries are part of the Nile Basin, a very important river, the longest river in Africa, not just for contemporary times, but also historical times and cultural significance of the Nile is incredibly big. And the Nile doesn't just have one water tower, it has three, according to this map. It's the Kenyan Highlands, the Albertine Rift, and then the Ethiopian Highlands, as I've mentioned. And then focusing again on those top three, and one that's more closer to home here, I'm in Johannesburg now, so we can just go back. The Angolan Plateau, it's matches quite similarly to the Angolan Highlands water tower polygon, so we're fairly confident that we're not overestimating the importance of the Angolan Highlands water tower. And it's a very important water tower because, and I will get onto this and explaining this further, but it's a very important example because you have an area that has a high rainfall and an area that is requiring that water in terms of the Okavango Delta, which is essentially a desert. So without that connection, the Okavango Delta would simply dry up because of the latitude that it's at and the amount of heat that is experienced there. And then closer to home for us here in South Africa, the Lesotho Highlands are incredibly important, especially for the eastern part of South Africa. Essentially, Lesotho supports Africa's human water demands. And I just want to say one more thing about this map, which it's a very important map, but it is quite important for the purpose of this talk. When it comes to this map, only 2 sentences were said, and myself and other colleagues have tried to track down the authors of this map and whoever presented this map, because we'd like to understand a little bit more about how they got to these polygons, and some of them are quite obvious, but some of them are a little bit more tricky. So what they did in defining these water towers, they were identified by relative elevation, so generally 200 to 800 meters above the surrounding area, and precipitation above 750 millimeters per year, and runoff above 250 millimeters per year. So quite broad defining criteria. And then I think the second sentence, and this is the only 2 sentences that they say about this very important map, is they were also selected for the contributions they make to water resources for populations beyond their delineated boundaries. So a very important concept there is that, for example, in the Angolan Plateau or the Angolan Highlands water tower, there might not be a lot of people living there, but this source water region is important for all the areas that are beyond its delineated boundaries. So there's areas for populations or populations that are really far away from the source water region that depend on that source water region. I think it's a very important consideration when we want to define water towers. So redefining the water towers is this is a little bit of a summary of what we've just spoken about. Again, the Immerseal paper, we really spoke about the defining criteria was about snow and ice, and what it meant was that Africa was left off of the map. And then in the 2010 definition, we only had those 2 sentences, and it really doesn't account for the diverse range of freshwater ecosystems across the continent. So it leaves out, for example, several of Africa's important water towers, for example, in Zimbabwe, in Cameroon, in Ghana, in Togo, and Central African Republic, and other highlands in Rwanda, Burundi, and the DRC. So yes, it does a very good job at depicting major river basins that we've spoken about, the Congo and the Nile and the Zambezi and so on. But there are others that are left out, and we'd like to unpack that a little bit further. So just to pause here, Stephanie now is going to play the Angolan Highlands Water Tower explanation video. This video was produced by National Geographic by the cartography team in connection with our paper, and it was presented at ESRI last year in San Diego. I just want to see, is it audible? I don't hear it currently. Let's just hear.
In Africa's arid regions, highland
okay, it's
water...
audible. We can restart it. Thank you, Steph. Okay, it's not audible again for me. Something happened. Right, let's just try and get that. I promise you'll love to see this video. It's really like my pride and joy. Try and get that back up.
I need to click the share sound. Now we should be in business.
Can we just restart it? Yeah, great.
In Africa's arid regions, highland water towers play an important role in storing and providing fresh water which sustains life downstream. The Okavango Delta, a UNESCO World Heritage Site in Botswana, lies in the semi-arid Kalahari Desert, but its source is hundreds of kilometers away in the Angolan highlands. Angola's landscape is dominated by the highlands of the BA Plateau. Its rainy season lasts from September to April, with its heaviest rainfall in the north and on the cooler central plateau. The highlands supply water to 11 river subbasins, 8 of them transboundary, including source waters of the Congo and the Zambezi, and the key tributaries of the Okavango, the Quito and Kubangu rivers. These highlands are an important regional water tower despite the absence of snow cover. The area lacked a defined boundary, which hindered conservation efforts. For that reason, the National Geographic Okavango Wilderness Project identified the Angolan Highlands Water Tower as an area of the BA Plateau above 1,274 meters. Annually, this water tower supplies an average of 423 cubic kilometers of water. However, the contribution to each subbasin varies. Okavango's catchment is shared by Angola, Namibia, and Botswana. It's estimated that over 95% of the water that flows into the Okavango Delta via the Quito and Kubangu rivers falls as rain in the Angolan highlands. This crucial rainfall accumulates in source lakes and extensive peatlands in a highland region known locally as Lizima Lia Mowono, meaning the source of life. In spite of their overlapping rainy seasons and adjacent headwaters, the water reaches the delta from these 2 rivers at different rates. The longer Kubangu runs a steeper, faster path over compacted soils and feeds the first Okavango flood pulse between January and March. Meanwhile, the meandering Quito seeps through extensive spongy peatlands and feeds the second surge in April and May, then sustains the delta through the dry season. The extent of flooding in the Okavango appears strongly correlated to the amount of early rainfall. The water tower's wettest year on record, 2011, led to the largest known inundation, while the 2019 drought produced the smallest recorded flood area. Defining the Angolan Highlands Water Tower and quantifying its contributions to rivers downstream will help with the conservation of this critical freshwater resource.
Awesome, wonderful. I'm just aware of time, so we'll go through this. So yes, just some key findings from this paper, and I don't want to repeat too much. Just that it was the first to find the boundary of the Angolan Highlands Water Tower. The 423 cubic kilometers of water that fall as rain. It's often being compared to swimming pools, 170 million Olympic-sized swimming pools. That's per year. The amount of countries that it supports, 7 different countries, not just Angola, and that's really in respect to the collaborative effort that's going on between all these countries, specifically Angola, Namibia, and Botswana. And then in terms of the Okavango Delta, 95% of the water, it's estimated that 95% of the water is provided by the highlands themselves. And then just a couple more points on that. It was mentioned that there's a lack of ice, and we know that Angola doesn't have snow and ice reserves. And we'll talk through the mechanisms that are allowing this water to flow all year round. And really, it's about peatlands. This is what I studied during my PhD. We've estimated peatlands to 1,634 square kilometers. These are important ecosystems for carbon and water storage, as well as Miombo woodlands. So we will explain the mechanisms that allow this water tower to provide water all year round. So up close, this is just using the MODIS satellite imagery for vegetation greenness throughout the year. It basically follows the ITCZ, or the Intertropical Convergence Zone, and the seasonality of Africa. You can see on the top right-hand corner. And what we did, to put it simply, was we made use of the Quito and Cubango catchments and a cumulative rainfall along those catchments. All we did was we subdivided that to quantify where 50% of the cumulative precipitation occurs along those two basins, and then calculated the average elevation above sea level at that latitude. And we got this value that was shown in the video, 1,274 meters. And because of the rivers eating into the landscape, we've just drawn a nice, neat boundary around the water tower region. And it works really well because it encompasses all the different catchments and the headwater areas, including the source lakes and the peatland extent within the Angolan Highlands, or the PA Plateau. So in terms of the buffering mechanisms, what are the mechanisms that allow for this water to flow all year round? And it's really about groundwater flow. So the water that falls as rain lands on these extensive Miombo woodlands. And then because of the Kalahari, or the underlying Kalahari sands and the woodlands, the water seeps very slowly and gets well filtered through to the groundwater level. And then when that groundwater level is exposed, or it contributes to rivers, we have peatlands that grow on the margins of rivers. And it was mentioned in the video, peatlands are very important for carbon storage and to regulate water and to clean the water. And so you have a combination of source lakes, which are the headwater systems of these rivers, Miombo woodlands, peatlands, and Kalahari sand, that allows for these rivers to flow all year round. And this is just it's got a lot on this slide, but it's really just to illustrate all the different basins that this water tower is contributing towards, and the different countries within the table. And then on the top right-hand corner, I want to point your eyes towards the seasonality of rainfall in this area. So within the Quito and the Cubango catchments, and above and below the water tower boundary, there is a distinct dry season between May and August every single year. And so from September, that's when the rains start to end in April. We have this very distinct dry season where there's essentially no rain. But because of the mechanisms that I explained earlier, the groundwater, peatlands, Kalahari sands, the Miombo woodlands, we have this constant supply of water throughout the year. And that really leads on to the Okavango flood pulse that we were mentioning in the video. The first and second flood pulse is really just about the hydrological characteristics of those two rivers. So in terms of precipitation and the amount of flooding in the Okavango Delta, we're very lucky that a lot of different studies have been done within the Okavango Delta, and most of those studies have to do with biodiversity, but there's some that have to do with the amount of flooding. And we have 5 different papers here that are illustrated in the figure to the left-hand side, where researchers have gone and mapped and quantified how much of the Okavango Delta is inundated. And then from those estimates, we created an average inundation, depending on the amount of estimates we have per year. And on top of that, we've put in the rainfall from the Quito and the Kubangu catchments, as well as the combination of Quito and Kubangu catchments. So what you can see essentially is that a bigger flood inundation is usually as a result of more rainfall in the highlands, and a smaller flood is as a result of less rainfall, which is sometimes obvious, but it's nice to see in a graph like that relationship is so strong. And then just to continue on the seasonality, we split the rainfall season between early rainfall. Sorry, on the right-hand side, we've split the rainfall season between early rainfall and late rainfall. And what we see is that the correlation between the amount of flooding and early rainfall is higher than the amount of flooding and late rainfall. So essentially, if there's good early rains within the early rainfall season, it's likely to result in a bigger flood. And if the opposite is also true. So if the rains come very late, those antecedent conditions, those conditions needed to prepare the area for a flood are not as strong, and so we won't have as big of a flood. So this is a very important quote coming out of that paper from Dr. Steve Boys. The Angolan Highlands Water Tower is not only keystone to the future of Southern Africa and its long-term resilience to climate change, but it has profound cultural and spiritual importance. Now that we've defined the boundaries of Angolan Highlands Water Tower within academic science, we need to protect it in partnership with communities. So very important quote from Dr. Steve Boys. And so just defining the boundary was a stepping stone in the right direction, but there's more work to do. So just on future research directions, as was acknowledged in the paper by Emma Seal et al., in African contexts, we have limited data, and we have not really started to recognize water towers and given them importance. So in order to do this, we need to strengthen our data and monitoring infrastructure to allow our researchers to have long-term studies and also respond to challenges such as climate change and pollution that we're facing in African river systems. And research must go beyond the traditional defining characteristics or parameters for water towers. We have to acknowledge Africa's diverse ecosystems, increase funding, technological advancements, interdisciplinary research. I've spoken today about precipitation or climate studies and river dynamics and groundwater, and it requires all these disciplines to come together. And then also in the context of Africa, it's the continent that's predicted to become the most populated by 2050. And that will put more and more pressure onto people and natural resources. And I just want to highlight here, just say Nkonga, he was with me on the Lugubungu River expedition, and he often goes and he's done some major transects of African rivers, and he's a local from Angola. So I just wanted to highlight him there. So you can read more about this in several conservation media assets. The first one is from African Arguments, where I describe this concept of beyond snow and ice, and then several press releases about the Angolan Highlands Water Tower since we've published. And then we are very proud that we were able to present this data and translating research to policy. And I think this is where National Geographic does a very, very good job in enabling the scientists to present data in a creative way that's easy to digest for the layperson and even for policymakers. So on the right there, we have Jill Tiffantala, CEO of National Geographic, that met with the president of Angola, Jean Lourenco. And also on the left-hand side, this is following presentations on the Angolan Highlands Water Tower within Angola. And from what I've seen as a researcher, something like this does go a very long way in the context of African ecosystems. Thank you very much for your time, everyone. I think I've gone over time a little bit, but yeah, we can open up now for the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Mauro. I really love the presentation and particularly the video. That was quite something, something interesting to learn specifically about the Okavango Basin. I've just been hearing about it, but this session has at least given me some insight into exactly what it is. Ladies and gentlemen, feel free to type in your questions in the chat box. I can see there's already one question from Andrew Aijuka. Maybe you could start with this, Mauro. His question is, are water towers the same as bogs?
Yeah. So bogs in this case would be something like peatland. So in this context, we can say that the Angolan Highlands has bogs, but it's not to say that every water tower would need to have a bog or a peatland. But this is an example where the combination of the sand, Kalahari sand with the Miombo allows for the peatlands to grow. And so it's not every single time that we'll have water towers that are peatlands. Yeah.
Okay, maybe just to make this clear, as I was going through your presentation and preparing for this session, there was one question that came up strongly in the office. We understand that the Okavango Basin covers 3 countries, specifically Angola, Namibia, and Botswana. But then again, it feeds about 7 million people in the countries of Zimbabwe, DRC, Mozambique, and Zambia. So the question is, why doesn't the Okavango Basin also include the other 4 countries, DRC, Zimbabwe, Zambia, and Mozambique?
So yeah, it's really got to do with the geomorphology and the watershed boundaries. So the watershed boundaries are naturally defined boundaries. So if water falls in one part of a basin, it will not cross into another one unless someone bottles it up and takes it there. So it's really just about where the rain falls and how that water is flowing through the system. So it will not be the boundary itself is really it's about the geography of the place. So it's essentially where the rainfall falls, it will support those rivers, and if rainfall falls in those other countries, it will contribute to other rivers. So it's really just about that in terms of basin.
Would you draw the same explanation to the Nile Basin, whereby the Nile Basin includes 12 countries, right from DRC, Rwanda, Burundi, all the way to Egypt?
Yeah, so it's a much longer basin. It's a much bigger geographical area that the basin covers. So in the context of the Okavango, it's a much smaller basin. It only covers those 3 countries, but the Nile, it's got 11 different countries. So it really just depends on the geography of the area, and the Nile is the longest in Africa, so it's going to naturally cross many more countries. So it's not politically defined. It's defined according to watershed and where the river will flow, or where the water will flow once it's hit the ground from rain. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, that's fine. I had one more question, then I can pick Natalie's question. Okay, there's several other questions coming. Please keep them coming. I had several. Another question I'd like to ask is, what would you say, as an expert working in this area, what would you say is the most outstanding sustainable conservation measure that has been so far implemented? And would you say that this sustainable conservation measure is applicable to all other water towers in Africa, and particularly the Nile Basin?
A measure that's within our project.
Yeah.
So for me, I really find that a lot of what we do, where it's got very high impact, is through the storytelling. So I think that's where we get it really well, presented out there. So it's really to build awareness around the issues. and that we do through storytelling, either through documentaries or on the river expeditions or within the communities. The stories are being explained and being shared with many different people. So I think that's where we're getting it really, really nicely out there in providing awareness. So I think our conservation media and our storytelling is our biggest asset that we have. And that can be in multiple different initiatives or projects across all the different organizations.
Okay, so I know through storytelling the different ways in which you do this, but also observing other. I don't know whether you're privy to some of other media houses covering different water towers in Africa. What do you think is the gap, and what do you think journalists should do to cover more about water towers?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there's been a lot written about the ones in Kenya and the ones that are contributing to the Nile, and then this one here. But overall, I think that the first step would be just to get the conversation going about water towers, getting people to understand the concept itself. So I think that the next steps is really about identifying where are the water towers. There's some water towers that I've shown today that are not mapped. There's some water towers that they could be known locally, but they're not known internationally or in a media outlet. So I think that would be one of the steps from mine, because what we're seeing is that the literature is quite limited on where these water towers are and how they work and what makes them work and what are the mechanisms behind that free-flowing water all year round.
Okay, that's quite something. Maybe just to reiterate, you say the literature is quite limited. We need to cover more about where the water towers are, how they work, and where they are. That is quite something. Thank you for that. Maybe just go to the chat box questions. Natasha Daly says, can you explain more about how the lack of inclusion in the global map hampers conservation? Lack of inclusion in the global map hampers conservation.
Yeah, so that's really about the water tower index produced by Emersil et al. I think for me, it provided an opportunity to let's work on this, let's rectify that. But definitely, in the context of this paper, when people highlight an area as an important water tower, conservation initiatives are promoted in that area. So within the Himalayas, as a great example of the world's water tower, the conservation initiatives around snow and ice and what we should be doing, the action that's required in those areas gets boosted as soon as someone sees that that's an important area on a map. So without Africa having any water towers on that map, it sort of gives the impression that we don't have, or there's nothing really to work on there. And there's a lot to work on there. There's a lot of conservation initiatives that, or potential initiatives that could benefit people and wildlife if we focus our efforts on the water tower itself. So without seeing it on the map, there is a bit of a problem. Yeah.
Okay. There are two questions that are almost similar, so I'll combine them. The first question is by Stefan. What do you think are the greatest threats to rivers in Africa? And are the challenges common to other areas of the world? Or must Africa develop its own unique science base?
Yeah, I love this question, Stefan. Thanks for asking this question. We've spoken about this before. In terms of development, I think that's a big threat if Africa develops using older technologies and isn't sustainable and clean, then that's a very big threat. I spoke about in the presentation the amount of people that are projected to live in Africa, and with those people comes development. So I really think that the modes of development, not to say that Africa must not develop, it's rather to say that the way that Africa develops is going to be a very important thing. And we've spoken about this before. And must Africa develop its own unique science base? And I think that's a very important consideration, because I would love to be able to open the floor to other African scientists and work and collaborate with them. But really what we're trying to do in Africa is always catch up And most of the time when it comes to science, we want to try and implement what's already been done. And maybe those techniques don't work in Africa, and maybe there's a bit of learning around that too. It's not often that you see African scientists publishing in Nature or publishing in very high impact journals, which is a shame because we have incredible scientists, we have incredible natural ecosystems and biodiversity to talk about. And almost always the status quo is that we're not able to present our science in the best format or in the best papers, or really highlight what the importance is. So in that way, I think it's mainly because of the historical catching up that we're having to do, and the copying that we're having to do, not in terms of the ecosystems, but in terms of the methodologies. And definitely, I think that it's a very, very difficult thing to do. But if Africa could develop its own unique science base, it would be hopefully someone would want to copy us afterwards instead of us copying them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. In the interest of time, I will combine the last two questions, okay, if at all they're related. So Scott Elder asks, does the soil and pit filter water in a way similar to commercial water filters like pitchers?
Yeah, exactly, Scott. So first of all, the Kalahari sand does a very good job at making the water clear and clean. Easy to, you can drink it basically. And then the peat is another one, although the peat would potentially make it slightly more acidic. But yes, the water filtering through the peat is, but it's coming out of the ground as well, so it's naturally clean anyway. But yes, essentially, peat is a very good filter for water and so you can drink it.
There's Sergio Costa. First of all, he congratulates. Actually, he's happy to see you. And the question is, what is the role that local communities can have in the water towers conservation?
So I think most of the time, the local communities already know what is good or bad practice. Oftentimes, we can learn from them. And so their role is to help us help them. So it's really to make sure that we're not giving them our tools. They're using the tools that they have. If they require more tools, that's great. But I suppose their role is to teach us on how they've been able to manage and be sustainable within these areas. In the Angolan highlands, we have communities there that have been there for forever, and the landscape is very much buffered towards them, and they understand it very well. So their role is to teach us.
Okay. There is a question by Stuart Tibaweswa. Are there any local conservation efforts in the Okavango people are using to protect the water towers? Could you please talk about them? Any local conservation efforts the community is using?
Yeah, there is a bunch. The Kerllen was going to speak more to that. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to join today. But we do have a forest guardian program, a river guardian program, where local people are monitoring, collecting scientific data, baseline data that's within the headwater systems, and then on down right at the bottom of the basin, again, we have local teams that are monitoring biodiversity, water quality, all these sorts of metrics that help us determine whether the system is healthy or not throughout the basin. So those initiatives are going on throughout, and they're really led by science, but also with the traditional knowledge connected to that. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mauro. In the interest of time, I think I'm going to read the last question. But before that, a couple of people have really congratulated you and NGO. The common comment is, I love your vision for researchers in Africa leading the way. Your vision is great. How can a scientist who is already done a research in water towers in Africa be supported? Before you answer that, Myra Jackson also says, it's encouraging to see how you have positioned yourselves as researchers to learn from local communities because traditional knowledge is key. So maybe you could just answer the question on how you can support a scientist who's already done a research in water towers in Africa. Do you have such support from NGO?
Yeah, you can reach out to us. our emails are there. You're welcome to email us and tell us about your work. If it's in a different country, that's also fine. It doesn't have to be the Okavango catchment or the Angolan Highlands Water Tower. Please feel free to email us after this.
Okay, thank you so much, Mauro. We'll quickly move to the next section of the program. Would kindly request you, Mauro, to please stay on the call and help us identify the winners of the trivia section. We're going to ask 5 questions, and the one who wins, this time round, we're not going to look at number 1, 2, 3. Whoever wins stands to win a token, which we will send in the course of next week. But before then, I would like to announce the winners for the last 6 sessions of this Nile Science Wednesdays. They were cumulative from October, November, December, January, February, and March. The first is Espoir Iradukunda. He's supposed to win a story grant from us as Infonile. Congratulations, Espoir. This shall be worked on in the next month. We're going to communicate. And then there is K. Emmanuel, who stands at Training and Mentorship Program. Emmanuel was number 2 with 20 points. And then there is Kerllen Tomno and Jesse. Kerllen Tomno is from Kenya, I suppose, and Jesse from Uganda. They both tied at number 3. They stand to win Infonile merchandise. We will communicate with the 3 of you and let you know how this is going to be done. But for this session, whoever will win with the highest points stands to win a cash prize, just a small token of appreciation. So please ensure that you really try to make yourself proud. Yeah. So Prim, are you on with us? I think there's a technical problem that Prim has. Let's kindly give her a minute or 2 to reorganize herself.
Hi, Debbie. Can you hear
Are you
me
ready?
now? Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay, you can go ahead.
Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. And thank you so much to the National Geographical Society team for leading us through a beautiful discussion today. So usually at the end of the sessions, we have a trivial question and answer session, and I'm going to be asking you just a few questions, about 5 questions, and we'll see who will be the winner for today. The first question, and this was mentioned a couple of times, I hope you get it. Number 1, list the 3 countries where the Okavango Basin is located. Kevin Omolo.
Kevin Omolo, at least you're ahead by 1 point. Go the next question, Prim.
The second question is, according to United Nations Environment Program, what are the 3 largest natural water towers in Africa? According to United Nations Environment Program, what are the 3 largest natural water towers in Africa?
How do we answer? How do we answer?
Just type in the chat box. Sorry, type in the chat box. Sorry, we forgot to mention that. Type in the chat box.
Come on.
Sorry, it's the second question though. Primrose, you can repeat, please.
According to United Nations Environmental Program, what are the 3 largest natural water towers in Africa? According to United Nations Environment Program, what are the largest natural water towers in Africa?
Okay, I think we're going to close that. So far, we have answers from Sergio Costa. Stuart, we have questions. We have closed that. There's Sergio, K, Emmanuel, and Stuart. Primrose, what are the correct answers?
Okay, the correct answers is Ethiopian Highlands, which takes the first place. The second one is Angolan Plateau, and the last one is Lesotho Highlands.
So K, Emmanuel was the first person to get it right. Stuart, you got it, but you were late by a few seconds. So K won, and Omolo won. Next.
Okay. During the session, we had that water towers are typically defined by the presence of snow and ice, but this definition has excluded Africa's water towers. So, which judging criteria has United Nations Environmental Program used in identifying water towers in Africa, given that we do not have a lot of snow and ice in Africa?
That is quite a technical one. Please type in the chat box. Okay, says Africa is small. Who has a different answer? There's Sergio. 2 more seconds for anyone willing to salvage themselves.
Yeah, Sergio's is right.
Sergio is right.
Yeah.
Okay. Stefan also had an answer, but he says Sergio's is correct. Precipitation elevation.
Well, I think he was first.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. So everyone, 1-1-1. So we have 2 questions to break the tie. Prim?
Okay, the fourth question is, list at least 3 ways that are used by Okavango Wilderness Project to protect and promote sustainable protection of the Okavango Basin. List at least 3 main ways used by Okavango Wilderness Project to protect and promote sustainable protection of the Okavango Basin.
5 seconds. Wow. 1, 2. There's Sergio, there's K, Emmanuel. Who else would like to try before we close? Stuart. Anyone else would like to try? I think we already have an answer. Correct answer. Okay, that question is closed. Kerllen, maybe you can let us know. There is K-Man, actually not K-Manuel is the first one. There is Sergio says monitoring, modeling, and training. Emmanuel is storytelling, education, and researching. I think he meant research. And then Stuart, storytelling and research. Kevin Omolo, storytelling, research, and community engagement. Stuart also added data. Who do you think has the 3 correct answers?
I think it's K. Emmanuel, so that we have scientific research, storytelling, and conservation education projects, which is exactly what he has stated. Sorry, Stuart.
Sorry, Stuart. So K. Emmanuel has how many corrects now?
2. He's got 2.
2 correct. Okay. K. Emmanuel is leading. What the last question, Prim?
The very last question: how many countries benefit from the fresh waters of the Angolan Highland Water Tower? How many countries benefit from the fresh waters of the Angola Highland Water Tower?
Does he have the presentation in front of him?
I know. He has everything.
He's very good.
The answer is 7. K. Emmanuel Leona, you have gotten it right. Congratulations. Sergio Costa says 11. Sorry, it's not 11. Curity says 7 million. Sorry, the countries are 7. The number of how many people benefit, Mauro?
Oh, it depends on how you look at it. But yeah, the 7 million would just be in the Okavango Basin. Yeah.
Okay. So the countries are 7. Congratulations, Emmanuel. You won in the first 6. You also won in the last 6 winners. You were number 2. And this one also, congratulations. We're going to communicate to you on how you're going to get the small token of appreciation. Maybe just to wrap this up, wow, this was quite interesting. I just want to say thank you very much, colleagues, for joining us for this session, the 12th episode of Nile Science Wednesdays. It was great to see a good number of you who have been joining us over and over again. There's Kevin Omolo, there's Suzanne Marmar, who has been joining all our sessions from the beginning. I saw Espoir at some point. K. Emmanuel Leona, you have been joining us over and over again. We really appreciate. And also there's Kevin Omolo from Kenya. I see you every other time. We recognize you. There are many others that I've not been able to mention, but just know that we really recognize your efforts. Keep joining, keep sharing the sessions with your friends. Special thanks to National Geographic and specifically Kerllen, Costa, and Mauro. Despite the fact that Kerllen was not able to join us, thank you very much, Steph, for making this possible. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of the 12th session of the Nile Science Wednesday. We are going to share the resources with you. This session has been running live on Nile and on YouTube through live stream. We are going to share all the resources with you also via email. So thank you very much. Have a wonderful evening. Bye.
Bye. Bye, bye, bye.
Bye.
Bye. I've shared the link in case anyone is interested on watching or getting the resources. Feel free. Oh, sorry.